So good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from in the world. Thank you for joining us for yet another in our series on mangroves. It gives me pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, who is Alexander Ferreira. Alexander is from the Federal University of Ceará in Brazil. He graduated in hydrobiology and has a PhD in ecology and did a postdoc in tropical marine sciences at the Marine Sciences Institute at the Federal University of Ceará. And this is where he carries out his research. He's developed research on estuarine ecology in temperate and tropical estuaries, and is presently focused on the ecology of mangrove ecosystems. Mainly working on the interrelationship among the forest and the physical and biological factors that determine their structure. He has also developed several projects on mangrove restoration and resilience to climate change in the semi-arid northeastern coast of Brazil. He's published several papers and he's trained many researchers and stakeholders in this area of research. He's going to speak to us today on mangrove rehabilitation, restoration methods, and strategies. So once again, Alexander, thank you for returning, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Doug, for the introduction. Thank you for all that are present, and thank you to these prestigious institutions that are making possible these meetings. I will put my presentation in the screen. Please send me, Doug, if you are seeing my presentation. Share screen. Okay. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay.
Alexander, you're muted.
Oh, yeah. You hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, a moment. I cannot. Please, only a moment. Well, again, good morning for all. We are talking today in this cycle of mangrove lectures about the importance of mangrove rehabilitation, about restoration methods and strategies to restore mangrove, and the relations of mangrove restoration with the carbon and other greenhouse gases balances and the global carbon dynamics. So let's start with this. Unfortunately, the mangrove forests have passed the last decades decreasing in their extension. From the 80s decade to the 2020 decades, in spite the clearing rate have decreased, still mangroves are being suppressed by several human activities and by several different reasons. We can say that the present extension of mangrove forests reach around 14 million hectares. You see there two different numbers, one posed by Worthington and Spalding, another by Bunting, different numbers that are determined by the different measure methods used by these researchers. One estimates the mangrove extension area in 13.67 million hectares, and another estimative of 14.73 million hectares. But the losses are still high. And these losses by human drivers today are increased by the climatic changes that are also impacting impacting these ecosystems. So these two drivers, the human and the natural, I know that climate change is not fully a natural driver, but both are impacting mangroves and are increasing the physical and the functional degradation of mangroves. Sometimes the functional degradation precedes the physical degradation of mangroves. If we talk about mangroves, we need to talk about the huge capacity of mangroves stock. One of the most important nutrients, the carbon. Carbon is the fuel of the food chain in the planet. And this forest can fix a great amount of atmospheric carbon, around 3% sequestered by tropical forest, but they fixed by photosynthesis by the tropical forest, despite they represent only 1% of the rainforest area in the planet. So mangroves can stock these huge amounts of carbon, more than 1,000 carbon tons by hectare, um, representing only 1% of the total forest area. And as you can see here in this graphic from Donato and colleagues, several different forests compare boreal forest and temperate forest and tropical upland forest compared with mangroves. And you can see that the most carbon deposit of mangroves are in the soils. So by this, mangroves can stock huge carbon amounts because they store carbon in the forest, in the vegetal tissue, and also in the soils. The soils are the compartment where usually the carbon is in higher amount. You can see that reach between 49 and 98%. Uh, Mangroves can contribute with up to 15% for the coastal sediments that are stored in the coastal ecosystems and may be responsible up to 10% to the particulate carbon that enter in the oceans. So this huge amount of carbon accumulated in mangroves make that when mangroves are deforested or degraded or destroyed, they generate huge amounts of emissions, of carbon emissions to the atmosphere. These emissions can reach around 10% of the Earth's forest cleaning emissions. Really a huge amount. Uh, I said previously that the high mangrove clearing rate have decreased a bit in the last decades, but the losses are still high. Uh, But what are the main mangrove degradation drivers and their importance? Let's see in the last 2 decades, uh, from 2000 to 2010 decade to 2010 to 2020 decade. All the numbers that I will present here in these slides about drivers represent the changes among these 2 decades. First, the aquaculture, mainly of shrimps. Shrimp aquaculture have been one of the most important mangrove degradation driver in the last decades, but, but recently it has been decreased this deforestation rate, the importance of this deforestation driver, fortunately, by the decrease of this activity in Southeast East Asia, despite it have increased in the neotropics. But the important is that this driver have decreased in the last decades. After that, agriculture, the extensive monoculture and the land use change is also one of the most important mangrove degradation drivers. You can see that close to 10% increases this driver, and mainly by the increase of conversion of mangrove in palm oil plantations, despite the conversion of mangrove in rice paddies have decreased, but together with other agricultural and conversion forms made with this driver increase the importance. Yet we got climate change, natural disasters, and others. These include obviously extreme events. Climate change is just reaching mangroves and high degradation rates are happening by climate change, and you can see that this driver increase from close to 25 to more than 32%, and it's becoming a very significant driver of mangrove degradation. Uh, Sea level rise, storms. It's not only sea level rise, the changes in sea level, be the rise or be the decrease in ocean levels, have been impacting mangroves all over the world. What more? Urbanization and industrialization, their direct and indirect effects, despite this driver has decreased a bit, still is impacting mangroves, mainly urban mangroves. The most problem, the most important problem with urbanization and industrialization are the associated impacts. As you can see, garbage, sewage, spilling that pose a permanent threat to mangroves since the human occupations tends to increase. Well, obviously, the better way to maintain the countless goods and services that mangroves furnishes is to preserve these ecosystems. But it's greatly significant. It's every time more significant to restore these ecosystems whenever possible, uh, because it's necessary. And if possible, if made with sound methodologies. It's not difficult to restore mangroves, but you need to follow some path or some methodologies to be succeeded in this. Uh, let's when we talk about restoration jargon, we use several terms indistinctly, but they mean different things. Let's talk about rehabilitation, restoration, and recovery terms. Rehabilitation stress the reparation of ecosystem processes, productivity, and services. Just the restoration is different. Restoration prioritizes the reestablishment of the pre-existing biotic integrity and the species composition. See that this definition of restoration is a bit restrictive. It's extremely difficult to restore the pre-existing species composition in an ecosystem. We are using for these definitions the standards of the Society for Ecological Restoration that appear here at the SER. So again, it's very difficult to reach the reestablishment of all the species pool pre-existing before the degradation. The ecological restoration, it's a process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been destroyed or damaged. Ecological restoration also implies to move an ecosystem that was degraded to a path of recovery, but importantly, allowing the adaptation to local and global changes and the persistence of their component species. I read this definition because it's extremely important. This is an important definition from the SIR, since recognize that the environmental conditions and ecosystems change, and that the component species and their relationships are crucial to shape the community through the ecological processes. So we can restore an ecosystem. We have permanent changes in the environment and permanent changes in the species that integrate these ecosystems. So we need to consider this. Well, so I will treat restoration as a process and the recovery of the ecosystem as the result. And also consider that rehabilitation can be a stage of the restoration process. So, with the terms clear, we can enter now in the restoration projects and attempts. The mangrove restoration projects and attempts are extremely variable in the targeted extension. You got small areas, you got huge areas, different tree species and densities, different management actions. But in general, the chances of success of a mangrove restoration are inversely proportional to the area extension. It's very difficult to take account of restoration of a great area or a very extended area, and it's more easier to manage a small area of mangrove restoration. It is recognized that it's possible to develop the projects, the restoration or rehabilitation attempts as experiments. And we can use these experiments, these trials, to establish more general models and to take conclusions and information to set new policies and new protocols to guide future restoration. So it's extremely important to take information of the restoration issues and outcomes that we are applying. This framework, it's called the experimental adaptive management, and obviously it's more practicable in smaller projects. Let's talk about the specific points here. You need first clear aims or objectives in the project of mangrove restoration that you will to establish. Clear objectives are extremely important. For what do you want to restore a mangrove? To restore, to recovery services, environmental services for the population. You want to restore a mangrove for preserve the area. You want to restore the mangrove for the return of the biodiversity. You can combine several aims with that. But the most important thing is the clear objective of the project that you are executing or that you will execute. So you execute the project and you need to monitor the actions and the outcomes of the project. You need to revise, need to assess how the project is progressing. You have environmental state indicators, be biotic, be abiotic, that informs you about how the project is progressing, how the restoration is progressing. With this information about the outcomes of the project, about the progress of the project, you can think about the continuation of the actions in the time. This continuation requires a permanent monitoring of the actions to gather information important. And in the same way, you can think about extend the actions of the project, be in the area restored or in the communities, the human communities reached by the project, by the advantage of the mangrove restoration. This is the experimental adaptive management. Well, when we talk about attempts or projects to restore mangroves, I'm talking distinctly about restoration attempts or restoration projects, but I prefer to call it projects, restoring projects. About this, several protocols and case studies have been published. This in the slide, I use it because it's extremely simple. Uh, it's a model created by Bozir, not created, but designed by Bozir and colleagues. And how this protocol starts. Well, first you got a degraded mangrove aside with where the mangroves have been degraded or destroyed. And when you aim a recovery plan, the first is to understand why the forest is not recovering naturally by itself. This point is summarized here in the step one and the step two. So you need to understand the ecology of the mangrove forest and the species that that compose the mangrove that you are trying to restore. And you need to understand also, it's very important, the hydrological factors, the hydrological regime in this place, in the target area. First, you need to know the target area. You need to know, you need to make, how can I say, a forensic work. Yeah, it's a forensic work. When you gather, you need to gather information about the history of the degradation, about the history of the drivers, the degradation drivers of the area, how are the physical and biotic aspects of the area, if they suffer changes in topography, in hydro period, or in soil by or after the degradation. This is a crucial step because since it gives you an idea of the viability of the project. You cannot invest time and money in restore an area that is not restorable. So together with this, you need to identify the natural state of the regional mangroves. You need to use close mangrove stand that was preserved, or if you don't got preserved mangrove in the estuary in a close region where, of the target area. And it's very important because you need to understand the hydrological features of this reference mangrove. How the tides reach these mangroves? How are the conditions in the rain season? That is when the mangrove release their propagules or their seeds. What is the tree composition and the literal distribution of these three species? What are the response to environmental changes, be human or natural? These are information that you need to establish your the restoration in your target area. Yet, you need to know the ecology or the autoecology and the diversity of the tree species and the biota that live in the mangrove. You need to know the tree life cycles, the reproduction patterns of the trees. As I told one moment ago, mangroves release their propagules in the rain season. So it's in the rain season that you got seeds for restore or for recovery a mangrove. You need to know the reproduction patterns of the trees, the forest structure, how are the features of the propagule establishment. And in the biota, you need to know the functional groups. If you remember, we talked in a past lecture about the functional groups that are extremely important in the functionality of mangroves, that are important in the community structure and in the food chains, obviously. Another thing, another issue that it's extremely important to know is the dynamic of the establishment of the propagules. Because the propagules of mangroves, mangroves are close in the Indo-West Pacific. You got around 40 mangrove species. All the propagules have different features. Some propagules are higher, others are smaller and lighter. Some propagules only establish if they are up, another propagules established in every position. So the tides and the influence of the tides, it's a very important factor that determine the propagules that establishes in the littoral area and where, in what part of the littoral area they establishes. You can see here in the design, for example, the Rhizophora propagules need to be up to establish while the propagules of Abyssinia and Laguncularia, they grow in every part of the littoral area, independent of the position. Also, you got to recognize or to know if some species consume the propagules, eat the propagules. Frequently, crabs and another invertebrates eat the propagules, and they can determine the tree species that are in the areas because they eat some propagules more than others. This is a very extremely important issue to know. Well, following the path of Bozir, after that, it is necessary to remove all the factors and things that will impair the secondary succession, because you depend of the a succession of species that return the biodiversity in the stand. For example, the retention of mangroves, of propagules before they reach the area. Sometimes the propagules are not reaching your target area because are retained in some place before reach your area. Or terrestrial plants that are encroaching your target area, or people or cattle. It is you need to remove that factors that are impairing the restoration of your target area, that are impairing the mangrove settlement. Uh, the propagule, oh, it's here. The supply of propagules is extremely important, is crucial to mangrove recovery because you depend uh, of the propagules reach your target area because you will not, it's impossible to to plant all the time if necessary to plant. So propagules need to reach your target area. As you can see, the propagules have different features. Some remain buoyant more time, some of them sink very quickly after released by the trees. So, but the most important feature is that when they reach your areas, they can fix naturally. And this is a very important help to restore your area. Sometimes propagules pile up in several parts of the river on the estuary, and you can collect from there if necessary. Here you can see Rhizophora mangle propagules buoying in the water. On another plants in the left, you see Laguncularia propagules and up small Laguncularia propagules that are very small, very fragile. And in the right, you can see propagules of Abyssinia and other propagules, and all of them have different features and different buoyancy times and different necessities to implant. But where? Uh, Next, together with this, it is necessary to consider, and this is very important, the subsistence and traditional mangrove users to learn the traditions and perceptions of the native populations. Because the most population that live close in the mangroves use the resources of mangrove for their own livelihood in the form of fishes, crustaceans, wood, and a lot of goods and services that mangroves furnish. The ideal is to engage these populations in the mangrove restoration and in the mangrove care after restoration. This is extremely important because the traditional communities have a knowledge that can help us. So the science knowledge with the community knowledge can really increase the actions of the mangrove restoration. You can use the project to enhance or to increase the services, the environmental services for niche-by mangrove. You can aim to recuperate a mangrove for return the environmental services for the native populations to protect the coasts or to increase fisheries or to furnish more timber or more clean water. This is very important. Another thing that is important, and now I'm talking this because the exaggerated anthropocentric vision about the environmental services. The environmental services provided by mangroves are not only for humans. Right? This vision of the nature to the service of human is not correct. The biota of the mangrove, the organism and the plant, the whole mangrove ecosystem need a return of the benefit of the ecosystemic services. So the ecosystem services are not only for humans. This is very important. So we need to disponibilize for the biota all the advantage of the mangrove restoration because the most of environmental services are from the biota. It's the biota that produce the most environmental services. So we cannot forget of the organism. So uh, then, in function of these 1 to 4 steps, you define the appropriate target sites to restore. You need to show if there are next close to urban areas, if the logistic to restore it's easy to carry, and several aspects that made in the practicity of the project. After that, you need to restore the hydrology and remove any remnant barrier to natural regeneration. So let's see some pictures of hydrological restorations. We have been working Northeast. These are images of different hydrological restoration works. In the left, you see extensive areas in the north of Brazil. The size and the, the extension of the channels depends of the size of the hair of the area. Great areas need more channels and more extensive channels, and small areas the opposite. The two up images are from Mexico, but the other images are from Brazil. You see that the size and the shape of the channels differ. We want to talk about this later. Here are examples of channels work in Mexico. They can be made in zigzag shape or fishbone. There are different designs of channel, but they are according to the size of the area. Okay, then if the hydrological restoration that you perform promote the regeneration, you have a mangrove in course of natural recovery. And so the next fundamental step is to assess the success and the return of the fauna groups that are important for the functionality of mangroves. You need to assess and to monitor the sustainable utilization that this mangrove can be. You need to assess the development of the vegetation and the succession of the different plants or the different mangroves that are occupying the area. You need to assess the recruitment of the fauna how the functional groups and the key species are returning. You need to assess the environmental factors and the ecological processes that this faunistic return are furnishing to you. So at this point, the passive and the active restoration diverge. When you when you made a passive restoration, you only try to restore to remove the factors that are impairing the processes that construct the mangrove, that allow the establishment of the mangrove. Sometimes only making a hydrological work, you can obtain this. If you are trying to make an active restoration, this is a different thing because an active restoration requires a physical intervention, an engineering to recuperate the functions and the characteristics that the mangrove lose by the degradation. So, okay, let's take a water. So, if the natural regeneration failed, now you need to think about to plant. For this, you need to select the appropriate species of mangroves, of trees to plant. The species or the tree species that you will choose depends of several things. Depends of the diversity of the mangrove stand, of your target area. Depends on the region. As I told, the Indo-Pacific region have more mangrove species than the neotropics. This is important. And the aims of the project. This means, for example, that in mangroves with few tree species, like neotropical mangroves or semi-arid or arid mangroves, it can be more easier to use one or two key tree species to restore the ecological functions earlier. Some mangrove species, for example, Rhizophora, it's very used by that, can return more quickly some ecological functions. For example, Rhizophora it's a more productive tree species. They can return more quickly the amount of organic matter and of detritus of the soil. The Rhizophora species are more resistant. They grow more quickly. They are architecturally more complex. This allow the colonization of more faunal species, more prey found refuge, more predators also find refuge. Then Rhizophora species are very used to start a restoration and to rapidly bring some ecological functions that are important to rehabilitate a mangrove. For example, if you are thinking in restore an arid area, in this case you need to use, for example, Abyssinia trees, since they are more suited for restoration in arid areas. Or if you are aiming to mitigate climate change impacts over coastal areas, waves, wave surge, storms, extreme events, you need to use trees with a more mechanical resistance to these events and with a higher regeneration capacity after the events. What I'm trying to say, for example, the Rhizophora trees have that characteristic root systems that can offer more resistance to storms, to waves, not only Rhizophora, but several other trees that got very important root systems. But this mechanical resistance of the roots of Rhizophora, in compensation, Rhizophora got not sprouting meristems. So after the destruction event, you got not with the software, you got not big regeneration possibilities that, for example, give Abyssinia. Mm. After an event, when the mangrove is destroyed, Abyssinia is more able to sprout. So you need to pay attention to these facts to select, to choose the tree species that you will use. Remember that in high tree diverse mangroves, as we found in the West Pacific, in South Asia, for example, you need to plant more than one species because you need to increase the diversity of the restoring area with trees and with the organisms associated to these tree species, invertebrates, microorganisms. This is needed to increase the ecosystem functionality that depends of this fauna. Countless projects of mangrove restoration in Asia have failed by the fact that was planted with one only one species of mangrove or few species of mangrove. Remember that some Asian mangrove forests can have up to 15 mangrove species, while the neotropics you have not more than four species or three or four species of mangrove in a single stand. So the South Asian, the Indo-West Pacific mangroves need that you place more species to have a more functional recovery of the ecosystem. Okay. Uh, well, we have been restoring here in the northeast of Brazil, when I actually live. We have been restoring some mangroves and some areas here in northeast Brazil and in the north of Brazil. Remember that northeast Brazil, it's a semi-arid area, and the north of Brazil, it's a humid area where exists the huge Amazonic mangroves. But in the northeast, we got estuaries with small mangrove stands and with a very dry climate. So we see here in these pictures several images about the restoration, the plantings, in this case that we have made by here. You see in the left, in the up, how we put ropes to mark the distance between the mangroves, the density of the seeds, if you will plant seed by 1 square meter or more or less density, depends of the cost benefit of the project. So in the middle, you see channels with propagals planted in the border of the channels. When the water brought by the channels maintain the lateral parts of the channels humid, you can plant more rows of propagals together to the channel. And in the right, you see different plantings, the most of them of Rhizophora. And there in the bottom, you can see a methodology used for prevent the predation of the propagal by crabs. It is to put the seedling into a PET cylinder, make from a PET water bottle. You cut both the extremes at the bottom, and you use to avoid the predation by crabs. It's important to stress this, the only image from Mexico. Mangroves cannot live in permanent flooded areas. So if you got an area that you need to restore, but is now permanently flooding, you need to rise the mangroves, the plants up of this flooding. So the guides of Mexico have used this methodology to rise the plants in nucleus. This methodology is called nucleation, where the mangroves remain out of the water and can grow, and after that make pace with the levels of the water, of the tide. Well, I will show you some project and some attempts of mangrove restoration that we made in the northeast of Brazil. Here we have a project in the Potengi River, uh, north of Brazil. Here we made any, was not necessary any hydrological restoration measure, since you see that it's a creek in the side of the restored area, the recovered area. This project was the objectives to restore the mangrove for the return of fishes, crustaceans, fishes, mollusks, because the fishermen claimed that the population of the Eucides cordatus crab. This is a big crab. It's one of the main sources of food of the traditional populations. The crabs was decreasing their population. So we aimed with this deforestation to return the Eucides cordatus populations and also to study the capacity of areas impacted by the agriculture. These were areas that were cleared for establish shrimp ponds, but was abandoned previously to establish the ponds. So we aimed to test these areas, how was the recuperation, the recovery of these areas. These images are of the planted area. In this case were two areas. One we selected for plant, and one in another area we leave to recover by itself. So this image is of the planted area. We planted Rhizophora mangrove, and this planted area rapidly develops high biomass levels. This is because Rhizophora trees got higher biomass in their trunks and roots and leaves than the other species in the region, Avicennia and Laguncularia. So this area rapidly develops a high biomass, and also the functional groups return to the area. The other area that we leave to recover by itself was recovered by the three species of the region, Avicennia, Laguncularia, and Rhizophora, but the biomass was lower. Here you can see the green plots are the restored, the planted area. You can see that between 2006 and 2022, the biomass stabilized. It's the typical behavior of a new mangrove stand, young mangrove stand, but the biomass of the self-recovered area is still rising in 2022. This is what we can conclude of this. You can plant an area to obtain rapid growth in the biomass, and you can leave other areas to recuperate by itself. The time it's higher to recuperate by itself, but they can recuperate with all the species that you find on the estuary. This is an image of the same area. The functional groups are returned to this area, and it's fully recovered now. This is another project at Northeast Brazil, in the Pacoti River, where we made an hydrological restoration. This was a sand flat and mangrove area that was destroyed for implanting a saltwork in the 80s and 90s decades, and was abandoned leaving high levels of salt in the soil. We made a hydrological restoration. We made channels to ameliorate the high salinity of the soil, planted some species, we planted Rhizophora, and the another species returned by their own, Avicennia and Laguncularia. The functional groups are still returning, but the main important conclusion of this project was that the sand flats that are common in the estuaries of semi-arid coast of Northeast Brazil are areas prone to be colonized by mangroves when sea level rise push them landwards. This is just happening in the Ceará coast. The mangroves are penetrating the river landward to the upper part of the river due to the salt intrusion that it's happening in the estuaries because the sea level rise. Okay, this is an example of, oh, sorry. This is an example of how the hydrological restoration by itself can recuperate the mangrove. You can see a temporal images from December of 17 to September of 20, and you see the great recovery of the mangrove, mainly with Abyssinia. Another image of the same project. Well, this that I presented was examples of small areas. Don't forget that there are projects mainly in Asia of huge areas that are trying to recuperate, or middle-sized areas in the Caribbean. But the problem with the huge, with great areas is that these extensive areas in South Asia were, in general, restored with one or few tree species, and which often result in mangroves poor from the point of view of the functionality and unsuccessful outcomes. So diversity is needed because furnish more resilience to mangroves. Differently, in neotropics, you have lower tree diversity, and this can facilitate the use of few species of mangroves to rehabilitate the forest. As you saw when you used the Rhizophora to start the rehabilitation of an area here in the northeast. So I am close to the time. Can I follow a few? Can I continue?
Yep, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, and going quickly. So the next step is the most important step, the assess of the success and the return of the functionality of the magnet. This is a very important step. If you got positive outcomes, your mangrove is going to be recovered. And if you got negative outcomes, you need to planting again, or you can take recommendations or data for improve your next tentatives. Well, again, going rapidly, let's talk about the carbon cycle. If we talk about talking about mangroves and the capacity of stock of carbon of mangroves, let's see how this carbon of mangroves circulate in the planet. It's a scheme of the pathways of carbon in the planet. Let's see first where are the main stored pools. There are the white parentheses numbers. In this number are in gigatons of carbon by year. We got in the atmosphere 800 gigatons of carbon. See these other huge pools, the soil and the fossil reserves. Imagine that these 10,000 gigatons of fossil fuels going to the atmosphere, that happening. Another huge pool of carbon is the deep ocean with 37,000 gigatons. the sediments of the ocean. And let's see the cycle of the carbons. 120 gigatons are stored in the forest, in the plants of the earth, but photosynthesis, uh, another part is released by plant respiration, the same amount that it's released by microbial respiration and decomposition is that they're released by the plants. Another part of the carbon remain in the soil as soil carbon. 1.4 gigatons of carbon are released from the earth to the oceans. The oceans take a quarter of the anthropogenic carbon released in the atmosphere dissolves in the ocean. 90 gigatons of carbon enter in the food chain, in the phytoplankton photosynthesis is used. Another part is released by respiration, the composition, a very similar amount is again released to the atmosphere. A part of this carbon sinks to the deep ocean. This is called the biological pump. It is the huge rain of live and dead organisms and particulated matter that rains to the deep ocean that constitutes the food of the bottom organisms and other part stock in the sediments. And finally, part of the carbon that it's injected in the atmosphere by the human in the form of fossil fuels emissions, in land use change, and that constitutes an annual increase of 4 gigatons by year in the atmosphere. Well, Earth's atmosphere, as you know, can trap heat from the sun. And despite this function of heat trapping of the sun in the atmosphere is necessary for life, it has been uncontrollably rising in the last decades by the effect of human energy and land use. Several gases like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, methane, and others are being released by the clearing of these wetlands. Mangroves and other wetlands like seagrasses and tidal marshes play a significant role in regulating climate of the earth through capturing great amounts of carbon dioxide. This is that we call blue carbon stock in the vegetal tissues and in the soil. Wetlands are disappearing in the planet. The clearing of wetlands is rising, and all the wetlands are extremely important in this function. A total of around 10 to 30 gigatons are stocked, are trapped in blue carbon ecosystems. These amounts are permanently updated by the science and are decreasing to habitat conversion. Well, I need to cut some part, but what is the most important thing about this? One of the most challenge today in the Anthropocene era is to restore and promote the establishment of mangroves, but to face climate change effects, either to prevent damage or to improve recovery after the events, restore mangroves is extremely important. Remember that architecturally complex mangroves like Risophora offer more mechanical resistance to impact of storms and waves, but have not the regeneration capacity after the event of other mangrove species. So you need to see that when you want to plan mangrove restoration. Any restoration attempt in the Anthropocene need to consider the restoration with the most native species and with the most functional group possible, but need to be able to resist new climatic conditions imposed by the environment. And of course, always be have of our side the traditional communities and the users of mangroves in every geographic setting. So sorry by the run, but this is that I have to talk with you. Thank you for all, and I'm ready for future questions and I don't. It's with you now.
Thank you very much, Alexander. That was an excellent presentation on restoration. Could I ask if you have questions for Alexander that you would type them into the chat and we can read them for him? And maybe while people are thinking about questions, I will just ask you one. You've talked about restoration, and this I think is usually locations where there were mangroves previously and you're trying to bring the environment back. But some people have talked about new plantations of mangroves, specifically in terms of trying to mitigate carbon emissions. What do you think about the feasibility of taking locations where there have never been historically mangroves and trying to develop them there?
See, you are talking about a thing that we call afforestation. When you restore mangroves, you plant mangroves in an area that have not previously populated by mangroves. Sometimes you got new sediment areas, and this is happening here in the northeast of Brazil. Some literal new areas are appearing, some sediments areas are appearing in the rivers by the sediment, by the movement of sediment, by the sea level rise, and new areas of sediment appear that in the future will be populated by mangroves. But you can take these areas and recover the mangrove to plant mangrove or you can to recover mangrove in these areas. In really, this is an afforestation. But since these areas will be occupied by mangrove in the next years, there are not problem to plant mangroves in these new areas to trap carbon and to for other services, ecosystem services of the mangrove. You only cannot plant mangroves or restore mangroves in areas where other ecosystem existed before, because this is a conversion of one ecosystem to another, and this is not correct. If you got no possibilities to return to the ecosystem that exist previously, you can consider the possibility, but conversion of ecosystem is not good.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions for Alexander?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yep,
Hello.
go
Can you hear
ahead.
me? Oh, good lecture, Alexander, sir. Good lecture. Sir, I have a query that how can we choose the species? Okay. How can we choose the species? Should we think about the successional stage or what are the basic parameters we needed to select before the species?
I understand your volume is so small, so Doug, can you
Yeah.
make for me the question
I
of
had
Sudeep?
trouble understanding the question as well. Sudeep, perhaps you could just type it into the chat and then I can read it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Let's wait.
While Sudeep is doing that, I just want to alert everyone to next week's talk, which will be the final in this series. And we will have most of our speakers will return and we'll have a group discussion. And at that time, you will have the opportunity to ask any questions that might have occurred to you over the course of the series. And if you are someone who is working in mangrove research and you have some data that you would like to share with us, you would also be able to present something at that time. Let me see now. Okay. The question from Sudeep is, how can we choose the right species? Before the species selection, what are the basic parameters that you need to check to determine the right species?
Well, so the species that you choose depends on the aims of your project, depends on the region that you are. As I told, the Pacific, the Indo-West Pacific mangroves, the Southeast Asia mangroves are more diverse. So you need to plant with more species as a praxis method because you need more functionality. In the neotropics, it's different. You got less mangrove species, but you need to choose the species in function of the aims of your project. If you are trying to ameliorate impacts of the climate change, for example, storm surge or wave surge, you need to plant species, local, native species, sure, that contribute and help you to secure structurally the impacts of this driver. How I say that you need to think about the species that are more easier to restore, but the species that got a more resprouting capacity after the event. So you need to see that if you are restoring the mangrove for return some ecosystem service for the nature population, for example, biodiversity, you can choose mangroves with a high architectural nature, with more architectural complexity to allow the life of more species and of more different species. This is the basic parameter you need to check before the climate change drivers and the human drivers and the functionality of the mangroves that you will plant, because more species bring more functionality and bring more resilience to mangroves. Yes, South Asian mangroves, the Sundarban, for example, in India is one of the countries, together with Bangladesh, where you can find huge mangrove extension area projects, mainly in the Sundarbans. It's a good remembering there.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Alexander. In view of the time, I think I will bring the seminar to an end for today, but remind you that you will have an opportunity to ask any questions next week. So I would invite everyone to join us again next week at this time. And once again, thank you so much, Alexander, for this excellent talk.
Thank you for your job, and thank you for the presence.
There's one more question here from Sudeep, but I'll look at this question and we'll ask it next week, and we'll get an answer for the question next week. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.